It started with a scream loud enough to rattle my living room windows. At first, I thought a coyote had broken into the chicken coop or that Thor, my German shepherd, had cornered a wild animal. But then came the voice, the unmistakable shrill pitch of HOA Karen screeching bloody murder from inside my house. And that's when I realized something unthinkable had happened. She used a master key and let herself in. The next sound? Thor growling with the low, controlled menace of a trained protector, followed by the telltale thud of a woman fainting flat on her back onto my hardwood floor. I hadn't even left the driveway yet. Just hours earlier, I had been sipping coffee on the porch with Thor at my feet and a plan for a peaceful day ahead. Moving into this neighborhood was supposed to be the calm after the storm, literally. After 2 decades in military K-9 operations, all I wanted was to garden, fix up my garage, and let my dog enjoy civilian life chasing tennis balls instead of suspects. But peace doesn't sit well with everyone, especially not with someone like Karen, our HOA president, who ran the community like it was her personal kingdom and treated the bylaws as divine scripture. She had it out for me from day one. It started with the mailbox incident. My mailbox, a basic black number, didn't match the colonial white ones she claimed were approved. I pointed out, politely, that my house predates the HOA and I was legally exempt. That conversation ended with her snapping a photo of my front yard and muttering about fines. Then came the Thursday hedge threat. Apparently, it was neighborhood tradition to trim every Thursday morning. I told her I mow on Sundays. She called that noncompliance. Then came the barking complaint. Thor barked once, when a delivery guy nearly walked into our screen door. Karen filed a formal nuisance report that read like a courtroom deposition. But even with all her madness, I never imagined she'd actually break into my house. Until today. I had gone outside to adjust the sprinkler head in the front yard. Thor was inside, calm, lounging near the door, trained to stay unless commanded. I was gone maybe 8 minutes. I came back to hear the lock click. My lock. I paused, confused. Then the scream tore through the walls like a horror movie shriek, and I dropped the wrench and bolted to the front door. What I saw when I swung it open almost made me laugh. Karen was sprawled across my living room rug, one arm flung over her face like a silent film star mid-faint, the other gripping a clipboard. Her shoes were tossed across the room, one of them lodged beneath my recliner. Thor stood in front of her in full alert stance, tail straight, ears high, blocking the path to the door but making no move to attack. His eyes met mine like he was saying, "Permission to disarm this lunatic, sir?" I quickly called him off with a simple word, and Thor sat by my side, still watching Karen like she might try something foolish again. She was shaking and muttering something about a wild animal and unauthorized living room configuration. I stared at her, stunned. "What in the hell are you doing in my house?" I asked, not calmly. Karen slowly sat up, dusted her blouse, and waved the clipboard in the air. "Routine HOA inspection," she announced, as if that explained everything. "Security check. You didn't provide a key, so I had to use the master." "Master key," I repeated. "I never gave anyone a key. How did you even get that?" "We have them for all HOA homes. Standard procedure," she said, trying to stand on shaky legs while glaring at Thor like he was the intruder. "Your dog is dangerous." I was nearly mauled. "He didn't even touch you. You tripped on the umbrella stand," I pointed out, motioning to the flipped stand near the door, then to the perfectly clean security camera dome above the TV. "And by the way, this house isn't legally part of your HOA. You have zero right to enter." That's when her face changed. She looked up at the camera, then back at me, and a flicker of panic crossed her expression. It lasted only a moment before being replaced by defiance. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," she snapped. "That dog needs to be put down." Those were fighting words. I pointed to the door. "Out. Now." Karen stormed out, shoes in hand, hair disheveled, muttering about vicious military attack animals. Thor followed her to the door and then sat down like a statue, his job done. I stood in the doorway watching her speedwalk down the sidewalk, clipboard flapping against her hip like some kind of cartoon villain who'd just lost to Scooby-Doo. Part of me wanted to laugh, but the other part was boiling. Because what she'd just done wasn't annoying or funny anymore. It was illegal. She'd broken into my house, terrified my dog, and somehow believed she had the moral authority to do it. I picked up my phone and called Lisa. My sister Lisa was a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. She specialized in real estate law and HOA abuse. She once took down an entire corrupt HOA board in a neighboring town by exposing fraudulent enforcement practices, rigged ballots, and embezzlement. When I told her what had just happened, she didn't ask me to calm down. She asked me to forward her the security footage and promised she'd start preparing documents before the sun went down. By dinner, I had 3 voicemails from Karen. One was a fake apology. The second was a threat about escalating fines. The third claimed she was going to file a restraining order against Thor. Lisa laughed so hard she nearly dropped her wine glass. "Let her," she said. "Then we can countersue for trespass, fraud, and harassment." The next morning, I posted the clip anonymously on Reddit. Just 30 seconds of grainy security footage showing Karen slipping in, smirking, and then freezing as Thor stepped into frame like a sentinel in a war movie. The final 5 seconds showed her panic stumble, her heel catching on the umbrella stand, and her collapsing like a poorly assembled mannequin. The caption? HOA Karen used a master key to break in, met my K-9 instead. Within 2 hours, it had 30,000 upvote. Comments flooded in. People cheered for Thor, suggested meme captions, shared their own HOA horror stories. A few even offered to send treats or Thor-themed merch. One guy commented, "This dog deserves a statue." Another wrote, "This is the Avengers-level justice I needed today." But the best comment came from a user named FiremanFrank88. It simply said, "I know this dog. He trained with our station in K-9 drills. That lady's lucky he didn't take her down. That's discipline right there." That night, as Thor rested beside me, I looked over at him and said, "Buddy, I think we just declared war." His tail thumped once against the floor in agreement. Karen thought she could barge in, write up some nonsense violation, and strut out like she owned the place. She didn't know she was dealing with a veteran handler, a certified legal bulldog of a sister, and a dog trained to protect like his life depended on it. She'd picked the wrong house. And this was just the beginning. The morning after the incident, I expected things to cool down, or at least for Karen to retreat and pretend it never happened. But that would have required a shred of humility, something Karen had surgically removed at birth. Instead, I woke up to find a bright orange citation zip-tied to my front gate. Violation: failure to comply with HOA emergency access protocols. Fine: $1,250. Deadline: immediate. I barely had time to laugh before the real storm rolled in. By mid-morning, the HOA group chat, which I usually ignore, had exploded with messages. Someone had leaked a message from Karen claiming that my dog had lunged at her and pinned her to the floor. Another message claimed she barely escaped with her life. A few of her sycophants offered sympathies, while others asked legitimate questions. Why was she in my home in the first place? Did the HOA actually have a master key? That last one hit a nerve. Suddenly, neighbors were chiming in, asking if their homes had been accessed without consent. A woman down the street named Miriam asked if Karen had used the same excuse when her jewelry box was mysteriously opened last month during a so-called routine inspection. I forwarded the entire conversation to Lisa, who responded with a single word: goldmine. While Lisa dug into legal statutes and HOA guidelines, I uploaded a second video to the same Reddit thread. This one was a clear cut. Karen entering, looking smug, clearly holding a key, stepping inside without knocking, and then getting surprised by Thor. The video included time stamps, door sensor logs, and the exact moment she fell over. No lunging. No contact. Just a trained dog doing exactly what he was taught to do: block and alert, not bite. The post doubled in popularity overnight. One user created a side-by-side comparison of Karen's written complaint and a still frame of her mid-fall, dramatically collapsing next to a toppled coat rack. Caption: Karen says, brutally attacked. Camera says, she lost a fight with gravity. It was glorious. The Reddit post gained traction fast, and soon, a small local news blog picked it up, running the headline: HOA President invades home, blames dog for her trip. I didn't even know the blog existed, but the journalist reached out and asked for a comment. I sent him Lisa's number. Her response? Let the record show, this HOA has made a serious mistake by choosing fiction over facts. By afternoon, Lisa had filed a formal complaint with the HOA Oversight Board and a cease and desist against Karen personally. And she wasn't done. Karen, however, had clearly entered the denial phase of her spiral. Instead of backing down, she held a so-called emergency HOA meeting in the community clubhouse. Attendance was mandatory, she said. I didn't go, of course. I was never required to, and even if I was, I'd rather wrestle an angry porcupine. But others did attend, and they recorded everything. The video made its way to me a few hours later. Karen stood at the front of the room in a tan pantsuit that looked like it hadn't seen a dry cleaner since the Clinton administration. Her speech was part deranged manifesto, part courtroom drama. She waved photos of Thor like she was presenting evidence to a jury. She even brought in a fake bite report with no medical signature. The room looked half convinced, until a teenager named Cole, who lived 2 doors down, pulled out his phone and projected my Reddit video on the wall behind her. You could hear the room go silent as Karen turned to face the giant screen. She stood there, blinking at the footage of herself entering my house, being startled by Thor, and tripping over her own 2 feet. The silence cracked when someone in the crowd burst out laughing. Another shouted, "You call that an attack?" Karen scrambled to shut it down, yelling something about context and manipulated footage, but it was too late. The damage was done. The Emperor had no clothes, and worse, everyone now had high-resolution video of it. Lisa, meanwhile, had taken it several steps further. She filed an information request to see what other master keys the HOA had supposedly created. Turns out, Karen had authorized a locksmith, under the guise of emergency policy, to cut copies for at least 7 homes without informing the homeowners. Some of those houses were rental properties, some vacant, some fully occupied. The kicker? She'd never filed that change through official channels. No board vote. No notice. Just a personal mission to inspect anything she felt like snooping through. Lisa presented this to the City Housing Commission with timestamps, emails, and even voice messages Karen had left on a neighbor's voicemail claiming she had the right to enter any non-compliant home. The city didn't take kindly to that. A formal investigation was launched into HOA leadership practices, with Karen's name at the top of every report. Back in our neighborhood, people were starting to wake up to the madness. Mr. Davies, the elderly man who rarely spoke and spent his days carving birdhouses in his garage, marched down the street to confront Karen the next morning. He waved a copy of the city code and demanded to know how she'd gotten a key to his home. His locks had recently been changed, and yet Karen somehow had walked in, by mistake, a few weeks back. She told him he was being dramatic. He told her he had surveillance too. Karen turned purple. But she wasn't done acting like the queen of the cul-de-sac. That same afternoon, she placed a bright red, dangerous dog notice on my mailbox and filed a request with Animal Control for Thor to be examined for aggressive tendencies. I got a copy of the request, faxed no less. I called Officer Hernandez, a local cop who had trained with our station's K-9 unit years ago and still kept up with the force. He came by the house, brought Thor a chew toy, reviewed the footage, and rolled his eyes so hard I thought he might pull something. If Thor was aggressive, he said while feeding him jerky. Karen wouldn't have walked out of here with both legs still working. Hernandez left me with his personal number and a promise to testify if Karen ever tried to pursue this further. He also hinted, unofficially, that the city was preparing to audit HOA operations across the district, and my footage had kicked it all off. Thor sat proudly beside me that evening as I grilled burgers in the backyard. He was blissfully unaware of the chaos he'd just helped spark. All he cared about was his frisbee and the occasional piece of grilled meat. But to me, he wasn't just a pet, he was a guardian, a truth-teller, and now, an internet hero. As the sun dipped low behind the hedges Karen had once threatened to find me for, I received a knock at the door. It was Miriam, holding a tray of brownies. She handed them over with a grateful smile and said, "For the dog. And for you. You started something good here." I thanked her, and as she walked away, I realized something. Karen's biggest mistake wasn't using the key. It wasn't fabricating stories, holding fake meetings, or even trying to turn the neighborhood against me. Her biggest mistake was forgetting that some houses have watchdogs, in every sense of the word. And we were just getting started. The day after Officer Hernandez's visit, I thought things might quiet down. Thor was calm, Lisa was prepping formal legal filings, and the neighborhood had started rallying behind the truth. But if Karen was anything, it was persistent and desperate. By the time noon rolled around, Lisa called me with a tone I recognized from her courtroom victories. That calm-before-the-storm voice. She had news. Karen wasn't just lying. She was actively tampering with records to cover it up. It started with the master key issue. Lisa had submitted a formal information request through the city and discovered that the locksmith Karen used wasn't officially affiliated with any HOA-certified services. Worse, the receipts showed cash payments and no board approvals. That meant Karen had likely acted alone, illegally, and knew it. She was scrambling to rewrite history, but the paper trail was already against her. Meanwhile, the Reddit post had exploded even further. Someone animated the footage like a crime reenactment, complete with dramatic sound effects and slow motion. Another user shared a remix of Karen's scream, turned into a dubstep track. At first I wasn't sure if going viral would help or hurt, but the public support was overwhelming. Hundreds of people were sharing their own horror stories about HOA invasions, phony fines, and fake inspections. The more I read, the more I realized Karen wasn't just an outlier, she was part of a much bigger problem. Still, she had crossed into dangerous territory by fabricating evidence. The next act in Karen's theater of absurdity came in the form of a letter delivered to my mailbox by one of her trembling minions. It was on official-looking HOA letterhead, complete with a seal I later found out was lifted from Google Images. It claimed I had intentionally weaponized a military-trained animal and was threatening the safety of the community. The letter threatened fines, eviction procedures, and possible surrender of the animal to proper authorities. I read it out loud to Thor, who wagged his tail and sneezed as if in mockery. Lisa, of course, tore it apart legally. Not only did the HOA lack any such authority, but the letter was riddled with errors, unapproved by the board and signed only by Karen. No witnesses, no quorum, no record of a vote. It was a bluff, a scare tactic, and a sloppy one at that. But Karen wasn't done bluffing. 2 days later, an animal control officer knocked on my door. Not an aggressive one, just a tired-looking guy with a clipboard and a confused expression. He'd received a report of an unregistered dangerous K-9 and was obligated to do a wellness check. I invited him in, let him meet Thor, showed him the footage, and even gave him a printout of the online memes. After a few chuckles, he told me off the record that this wasn't the first time Karen had tried to report a dog she didn't like. Apparently, she'd filed complaints against 5 other dogs in the neighborhood, all of which were either dismissed or retracted under pressure. What changed everything, though, was what happened next. Lisa received a copy of an internal email sent by Karen to her HOA board allies. In it, Karen demanded they fabricate additional violations to force me into compliance or push for removal. She suggested photographing my backyard from a neighbor's window and citing inappropriate landscaping, whatever that meant. She even floated the idea of calling CPS if she saw any kids near my property, despite me not having children. She was spiraling fast, and we now had written proof of malicious intent. Lisa moved quickly, filing an emergency motion with the City Housing Board and a restraining order request for both Karen and the HOA from conducting any further surveillance or property actions against me. Meanwhile, I was preparing my house for anything. I installed 2 more security cameras, reinforced the gate lock, and trained Thor to bark once if someone crossed the driveway line. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was necessary. But Karen's obsession wasn't limited to legal threats and drama. She began trying to sway public opinion again, this time through a printed HOA monthly bulletin she personally edited and distributed. The front cover was a cartoon of a house under siege by a monstrous black dog with glowing red eyes, an obvious jab at Thor. She labeled it "The Beast Among Us." My name wasn't printed, but the description left no doubt. Inside, she listed her fabricated grievances, one after another, in full caps with grainy photos cropped out of context. One showed my backyard mid-renovation and called it evidence of illegal livestock breeding. I had a single chicken coop. The level of delusion was reaching comic book villain status. That's when the neighborhood turned fully against her. Mr. Davies wrote an open letter printed and posted to every door, highlighting Karen's behavior and calling for an emergency recall of the HOA board. He included a checklist of every abuse she'd committed, from false fines to illegal entries. People started talking openly in the street. Conversations that were once whispers became declarations. She came into my backyard without asking. She told me my shutters were too red. She threatened to tow my car from my own garage. It all came to a head when Karen tried to ban Thor from the annual community picnic. The event was hosted in the neighborhood park, a public access space, and dogs were always welcome. But this time, she taped up a sign reading, "No aggressive animals allowed," with a photo of Thor attached. Not a scary photo, just one of him sitting in front of my house, looking proud. I arrived at the picnic anyway, leash in hand, Thor walking beside me. The moment we stepped in, a dozen neighbors clapped. One even brought a box of dog treats labeled Hero Biscuits. Karen stormed across the grass, veins visible in her temples, clipboard in hand. "You can't bring that animal here!" she screamed, jabbing her finger at Thor. He stared up at her and gave a small, unimpressed woof. "He has every right to be here," I said calmly, not taking the bait. "This is public property. City law overrules your fake flyers." "It's for safety," she snapped. "Then maybe you should leave," said Miriam, stepping beside me. One by one, others joined. It wasn't just about Thor anymore. It was about reclaiming the neighborhood from someone who thought fear equaled power. Karen stood frozen for a moment, realizing the tide had fully turned. Her posse was gone. Her clipboard looked less like a weapon of authority and more like a child's toy. Without another word, she stormed off to her car and slammed the door so hard it triggered her own alarm. Later that night, Lisa got a call. The City Housing Commission had officially accepted our complaint. An audit of the HOA's practices was scheduled, and Karen was going to be the first one interviewed. Even better, the locksmith she'd used had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity, confirming that Karen asked him to make keys under the table. I sat on the back porch again, this time with Thor curled at my feet and a sense that something big was about to change. For once, I wasn't just reacting, I was winning. We weren't just defending my home anymore. We were exposing something rotten that had festered behind false authority and bad clipboards for far too long. Thor stretched and let out a deep sigh, as if he too could feel the shift. The storm hadn't passed yet, but the wind had changed. And now it was blowing in our direction. By the time the 4th of July rolled around, The entire Valemont Hills HOA was tangled in a bureaucratic mess, and Karen's once pristine reputation had become neighborhood cannon fodder. But despite the public humiliation, she still hadn't apologized. Instead, she was digging in deeper, lashing out like a cat cornered in a cage. The clamp had been removed, the well restored, and the fire department had moved on with their operations. But Karen wasn't done. She wanted to reassert control, and her version of retaliation came in the form of fines. Lots of them. I opened my mailbox that morning to find a thick envelope from the HOA stuffed with printed notices. Each one cited a different violation. Improper signage on private infrastructure, unauthorized ground disturbance, failure to submit construction intent, and my personal favorite, obstruction of HOA field authority. The total came to $1,000 per day for noncompliance. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. It was absurd. I didn't even live within HOA boundaries. My property had been grandfathered in before the community was built. Their rules didn't apply to me, and Karen knew it. But that wasn't the point. She wanted to make noise. She wanted to throw sand in the gears. And I was about to show her what happened when you picked a fight with someone who understood how the machine worked better than you did. I called my attorney, forwarded him the notices, and within 24 hours, he fired off a cease and desist order citing misuse of enforcement powers and fraudulent targeting of a non-HOA parcel. He also included a clause about harassment, noting the psychological toll such petty tactics could have on a public safety partner. The letter was delivered directly to the HOA office, and the timing couldn't have been better. Karen had organized a big neighborhood flag-raising ceremony that day, complete with catered cupcakes and a live acoustic guitarist. So when the courier handed her the envelope in front of 20 residents and she opened it, her face twisted into something between a sneer and a spasm. Residents leaned in to ask what was going on, but she gave a thin smile and waved them off like it was junk mail. What she didn't realize was that the HOA board president had received a separate copy and was now looking over at her with a raised eyebrow and a slow shake of the head. Cracks in her support system were forming. Fast. But I wasn't finished. One of my quiet aces in the hole was the county's Public Facilities Compliance Clause. When any building or public event space, like the HOA clubhouse, lost certified access to emergency water or fire suppression, its permit could be suspended temporarily. And that's exactly what I petitioned the county to do. They reviewed the incident and the footage, and within days, a red-bordered notice was stapled to the clubhouse doors. It read, "Occupancy suspended pending fire safety reinspection." Karen arrived that morning to set up a board brunch and found the doors locked. She stood there in disbelief, holding a tray of muffins, while a crowd of confused residents gathered around her. Her face turned purple when she read the document, and even the guitarist from the flag event muttered, "You've gotta be kidding me," before packing up and leaving. Then came the backhoe. With the county now involved, a mandatory inspection of the buried pipe system was ordered. The well had run alongside the border between my land and HOA common space, and because Karen's clamp had been installed right where the two met, a full excavation was required to ensure no long-term damage had occurred. I offered up my end of the property with no hesitation, but the HOA land needed clearance. And clearance meant notification. The county sent a crew with machines and flagged off the entire patch of manicured grass Karen had spent years obsessing over. Pink tape marked every 5 feet. Surveyor stakes dotted the flower beds. And at 8 o'clock sharp, the digging began. Karen stormed out of her home in a robe and slippers, screaming that it was unauthorized destruction of community landscaping. The site supervisor calmly handed her the county order, signed and stamped. She tried calling the sheriff again, but this time she got a deputy who laughed and said, "Ma'am, they're following procedure. You might want to take this up with the board." And the board? They were beginning to distance themselves. Ted, the member who'd previously handed me the security footage, called to let me know Karen was losing control. A motion had been drafted to suspend her powers as HOA president pending the investigation's outcome. He said the other members were fed up with her making decisions without votes, and the legal exposure from the fire department complaint had scared them straight. That night, Ted forwarded me the HOA group chat logs. It was brutal. One member accused Karen of lying about the water line's purpose. Another claimed she threatened to bury the fire report. And one woman flat out wrote, "Karen's ego is going to bankrupt us." While they squabbled, I decided to turn the tables completely. I set up a small temporary structure on my property near the inspection site, a shaded fire access point, complete with a county-approved storage tank, labeled signs, reflective markers, and even a QR code linked to the emergency water map. I invited Elise and the fire chief to inspect it. They were thrilled. The chief called it a model example, and offered to use it as a template for future installations across rural counties. Then he said something that stuck with me. "You're not just helping us here. You're setting the standard." That gave me an idea. I drafted a letter to the County Infrastructure Board and recommended that all emergency water lines, even on private property, be reviewed and recognized publicly to avoid sabotage like this in the future. The board loved it, and just like that, my well and my handling of the HOA mess was on the front page of the municipal newsletter. I went from being a rancher with a hose to a community safety model. Meanwhile, Karen couldn't get her HOA newsletter published without half the board rewriting it behind her back. The final blow came during what was supposed to be a low-key HOA open house. Karen had attempted to reschedule it at a private residence since the clubhouse was still locked up under suspension. She sent out flyers, promised refreshments, and tried to turn it into a positive image event. But only 5 people showed up, and 2 of them were reporters. The questions came fast. What led to the water shutoff? Why were emergency resources cut? What legal action is pending? Karen turned red, then white, then tried to walk out, only to trip over a hose coiled near the garage. The photo of her sprawled on the lawn, half covered in lemonade and cucumber slices, ended up online by that evening. As for me, I hosted my own open house the next day, for the fire department, county board, and even the local news station. We grilled burgers, demonstrated how the fire line worked, and showed off the brand-new emergency tank setup. The story aired that night with the headline, "Local Rancher Turns Sabotage into Safety Solution." Karen's name was never mentioned directly, but she was clearly the cautionary tale behind every sentence. Her influence, once unshakable, was now a punchline. And the HOA? They tried to fine me one last time for unsanctioned public events. My lawyer sent back a letter saying that since I was operating under county safety guidelines, they'd be risking another legal escalation if they pursued it. That was the last I ever heard about it. I went to sleep that night with the sprinklers gently clicking on across the field, the well humming steadily beneath the earth, and the deep satisfaction that comes when someone learns, too late, that they messed with the wrong man. The day the official charges came down felt almost anticlimactic after everything we had already been through. I had imagined flashing lights, dramatic arrests, maybe Karen being dragged from her house, still clinging to that ridiculous clipboard like it was a crown. But in reality, it was quieter, more surgical. The city released a statement confirming that multiple counts of misconduct had been substantiated against the HOA's former leadership, and while the investigation would continue for a few more weeks, Karen herself had already been formally charged with trespassing, impersonation of an official, misuse of funds, and unlawful entry. The real cherry on top came when they confirmed that the locksmith had turned over voice recordings of Karen instructing him to create master keys without board approval. She tried to deny everything, of course, but her own voice betrayed her. That was the final nail. For once, she wasn't the one holding the megaphone. She was silent. No Facebook videos, no frantic flyers stuffed into mailboxes, not even one of her mandatory emergency meetings. Her house was dark, the porch untouched, no cars in the driveway. Rumor was, she had skipped town and moved in with a sister a few counties over. Not that it mattered anymore. Her grip on our community had been permanently broken. The recall election was certified, the funds frozen during the audit were redirected to a community relief pool, and a temporary HOA committee was formed to oversee legitimate elections for a new board. For the first time in years, people were smiling during neighborhood walks instead of glancing nervously at their lawns or trash bins. Lisa was already preparing a civil case against Karen. Several residents had joined in, filing claims for damages caused by bogus fines, emotional distress, and in at least one case, theft. An elderly couple had video evidence of Karen entering their garage and leaving with a box of tools. The same tools ended up at the community shed labeled as donations. The fact that she thought she could get away with it for so long was baffling. Or maybe it wasn't. People like Karen don't usually imagine consequences. They imagine power as permanent and themselves as invincible. That illusion shattered, and what remained was a hollow shell of a woman who had convinced herself she was the law. Thor and I returned to our usual routines, but things had changed. He was no longer just my companion. He had become a symbol. Kids in the neighborhood ran up to pet him, calling him Sergeant Thor. One neighbor made him a collar tag shaped like a badge. A bakery even created a special dog treat called the Thor Bark Bar, which they dropped off every Friday for free. A mural went up on the wall of the park's maintenance shed, a cartoon-style painting of Thor standing in front of a toppled clipboard with a cape fluttering behind him. Someone had even painted Karen running in the background, arms flailing, hair frazzled. I wasn't sure who the artist was, but it was detailed enough to become an instant photo op for every family passing by. Lisa, for her part, was already a legend. Her legal takedown of the HOA had inspired other neighborhoods to consult her for their own issues. She'd been invited to speak at 2 HOA reform panels and a podcast about legal accountability in local governance. When I joked that she was becoming a superhero in her own right, she just smirked and said, "Every superhero needs a good dog sidekick." She even got Thor a matching tie for her virtual interviews, and yes, people tuned in just to see him on camera. The formal HOA elections were held 6 weeks after Karen's departure. With the interim committee's support and a strict oversight process, residents nominated candidates who had actual qualifications instead of personal grudges. Mr. Davies, the birdhouse-making veteran, was elected HOA president. Miriam was voted in as community treasurer, and even Cole, the teenager who projected the Reddit footage during Karen's meltdown, was given a youth liaison role. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional and fair. They promised transparency, voted to remove the fake fines on record, and dissolved the so-called master key policy once and for all. With the chaos behind us, life slowly began to feel normal again. I spent my mornings tending to the garden, Thor at my side chasing butterflies and barking at squirrels like it was serious work. On weekends, we hosted backyard barbecues, something unheard of when Karen was lurking. Neighbors brought dishes, shared stories, and laughed like they hadn't in years. For a while, we avoided talking about her altogether, like she was a bad dream we'd finally woken from. But occasionally, someone would mention her, always with a chuckle or a shake of the head, and we'd remember just how close we came to letting fear dictate our lives. Then, one afternoon, a thick white envelope arrived. It was from the City Housing Board. Inside was a formal recognition letter addressed to me and Thor. It thanked us for our instrumental role in exposing unlawful activity within a community housing authority, and noted that our case had been used as a benchmark for reviewing HOA operations statewide. There was even talk of creating a public database where residents could report abuse anonymously, inspired directly by our Reddit post. Attached to the letter was a laminated certificate titled Civilian Guardian Recognition Award. Thor sniffed it, pawed it, then tried to eat the corner. I framed it. But perhaps the most unexpected part of it all came a week later, when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as an administrator for a federal K-9 training program. They had reviewed Thor's performance in the now viral videos and were thoroughly impressed, not just with his discipline, but with his restraint. They wanted to feature him in a public awareness campaign about civilian K-9 partnership. It would involve a few photos, a video shoot, and a featurette on the importance of training, not fear. I agreed without hesitation. Thor might not have been in uniform anymore, but he still had work to do. The video campaign launched a month later. It showed snippets of Thor's training history, his calm stance in the living room while Karen panicked, and his happy tail-wagging moments with neighborhood kid. The tagline was simple but perfect: protect. Don't provoke. Train with purpose. The feedback was overwhelming. People from across the country reached out, many saying they were inspired to train their own dogs better or speak up against unjust HOA practices. It was more than I ever expected. That night, after everything was said and done, I sat on my porch with Thor lying beside me, the neighborhood quiet and peaceful. Lisa texted a photo of a meme someone had posted, Karen's face next to a snarling poodle with the caption, "Who's the real threat again?" I laughed, then sighed. It had been a wild journey. From a single act of trespassing to a full-blown legal battle, we had gone through hell and back with nothing more than truth, persistence, and a dog who understood justice better than half the HOA.